again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Morning and Glory video. In today's episode we are going to cast our ever critical eye over another Imperial Guard 10th edition datasheet, and once more we are going to be delving into the murky depths of Forge World. That's right, it's time for another weird and wacky obscure guard tank. We've looked at the Malkador, we've looked at the Macaris, hell, we've even reviewed the Valdor. But there is one tank that is even stranger than all of these other ones. A tank that you have probably never heard of, and if you have heard of it, more than likely you've never seen one of them in real life on the gaming table. And there's probably a good reason for that. We are going to be taking a look at the Carnodon. This vehicle stretches back to the Horus Heresy, to the time of the Great Crusade. But now it is considered largely by Imperial commanders to be obsolete. But is that the case on the tabletop? Or does the Carnodon actually have some teeth? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's mount up, roll out, and drive right into today's episode. As is tradition, let us begin with a brief overview of what the hell the Carnodon actually is. Fundamentally, the Carnodon is a main battle tank. Although from a lore perspective, it is considered to be ancient and outdated, really made obsolete by things like the Leman Russ and the Rogel Dawn. You'll find that the Guard has loads of these things as hanging around, but really they're in deep storage and reserve, and they'll get brought out for planetary defense forces and regiments that are expected to do guard and garrison duty. Maybe if they're active in a war zone, you'll find them given to third line and reserve units, but they're not expected to really be on the front lines except in the direst of circumstances where the Guard just needs to throw every bit of armor it's got into an offensive or into plugging a gap. On the tabletop, it sits somewhere between a Leman Russ and a Hellhound. You'll find this thing isn't quite as heavily armed and armoured, but it also has that long-range Daka, something that separates it from the Hellhound, which typically has to get up close and personal. And this is well reflected in the Carnodon's main stat line. It has a movement value of 12 inches, which is not to be overlooked. It's pretty bloody speedy by Guard standards. Most super heavies will have a 9-inch move. Everything else in the Guard motor pool will have a 10-inch move. But I think it's just the Carnodon and the Tauroxes that are ground-based vehicles that have got this quite nice 12-inch move. Maneuverability is really important. You'll find a lot of experienced players say that 40k games are won and lost in the movement phase. So anything that can make you a bit speedy, a bit faster, will help you get onto objectives, get those firing angles a little bit easier, is something that should be highly regarded. After this, we have the tank's durability. It has a toughness value of 10 and a 2+ save. This puts it in a similar vein to a Hellhound, and it actually means it's very, very good. You see, a lot of people think that the T11 of the Russ is a big deal, but surprisingly, it's actually not. There's very little difference between being toughness 10 and toughness 11. When you think about it, anything that's a traditional heavy weapon like a missile launcher or an autocannon or a heavy bolter, they're still going to wound you on 5s and 6s. And if it's proper anti-tank like a las cannon, or whether you're toughness 10 or toughness 11 doesn't matter, it's still going to wound you on 3s. So being toughness 10 and having a 2+ save actually puts this on parity with the Leman Russ in terms of its tankiness. The big difference though is the Carnodon only has 12 wounds. Now that might only seem like 1 wound less, but that is significant. It does make the tank just that little bit easier to knock out because it's going to take 1 less damage 2-shot, 1 less damage 3-shot. It means that those las cannons have got a slightly easier time to get over the threshold and do the damage that they need to do. When it comes to Leman Russ, you essentially need to roll close to or maximum damage to knock out that tank with just 2 las cannons. But with the Carnodon, it's slightly easier. So essentially, it's a bit faster, it's almost as durable, but it is just slightly easier for the enemy to kill. Of course, it would be remiss not to round out the stat line. This tank also has a leadership value of 7+. That is very standard issue in the guard. Every unit in our index has a leadership of 7+, unless it's a commissar, basically. And then we have objective control of 3, which once again puts it on the same level as a Hellhound and a Russ. Attention, guardsmen. This is an announcement by the Departamento Munitorum. Element Games is an official sponsor of the Mordian Glory channel. They offer up to 20% off Warhammer 40k and 10% off bolt action and other game systems. Use the link down in the description to save money and support the channel. Anyone not using the link will be referred to the local commissariat. Also, don't forget that if you use referral code TIM3921, then you will receive double store credit, saving even more money on your future purchases. That's all for now. Fallout! Now, you might be lulled into a false sense of security and think, Mordian, that's a pretty decent stat line. I'm going to head over to Forge World right now and pick up a couple of these bad boys. Well, unfortunately, things start to go downhill rapidly. And this begins with the unit composition and the weapons and war gear. Each Carnodon comes with 2 autocannons and a Carnodon twin autocannon. That's its main weapons. You can swap out the twin autocannon for a twin las cannon, a twin multi-laser, or a Volkite culverin. And you can swap out the other 2 sponsored autocannons for heavy bolters, heavy flamers, las cannons, multi-lasers, or more Volkite culverins. But however you slice it, this thing is essentially just rocking spare firepower. It's like a Lehman Russ, but without the turret weapon. It's essentially got 3 extra bits. It's got like a whole weapon and the 2 sponsons of a Russ, but that's it. You can strap a hunter killer missile onto it, but that's not really a selling point considering every guard vehicle can have that. And the autocannons and the las cannons and the multi-lasers and the bolters and the flamers, they're all standard issue. They're all what you would expect. I think, unfortunately, if you went for like the Dakar loadout with the twin autocannons, there's just not quite enough volume of fire there. I mean, it's like 6 autocannon shots. It's okay, it's not too bad, but you could probably get the same result from a trio of scout sentinels, and you'd have a lot more utility from those things, and a lot more wounds combined as well. The las cannons are alright, but again, I think the big problem here is the Carnodon is suffering from the new twin linked situation where its rate of fire has been really badly curtailed. If you went for the twin las cannon, which is the main weapon on this thing, you're literally getting 1 shot. Sure, it's got an input reroll, but it's 1 shot. And that's like a crappy version of a Vanquisher cannon, which doesn't really do it for me. Amazingly, one point of note, the Carnodon twin las cannon is strength 14, which is funny. I guess it's regular las cannons, the ones that go on the sponsons, they're only strength 12. I don't know if that's a typo because everything else is identical to a regular las cannon. But hey, maybe that Carnodon twin las cannon being strength 14 makes all the difference. But I remain to be convinced. You're obviously not going to give it the multi-lasers because multi-lasers are absolutely dog shit. And then you get on to heavy bolters and heavy flamers, and they're not really much to write home about. The thing that really potentially makes this thing slightly interesting is the Volkite weapons. So you've got a Volkite Cavalier and you've got a Volkite Culverin. The Cavalier, it can get 2 of those which go on the sides, and the Culverin is the one that goes in the turret. Now, each Cavalier fires 2 shots, which means when you've got 2 of them, you'd have 4 shots. And these are strength 5 AP dash damage 2. So it's like a heavy bolter with less shots and less AP and less range. So you've got 24-inch range on the Cavaliers. It does get devastating wounds, though, which does make you raise an eyebrow for a moment. But it's not really... I mean, between the Volkite Cavalier and the Volkite Culverin, which also fires 4 shots, you're getting 8 shots, and they're all essentially the same profile. The Culverin fires 4 shots rather than 2, but there's only one of them, so it fires the same amount of shots as both Cavaliers combined, and it's strength 6 rather than strength 5, which by 10th edition standards is relatively meaningless. Really, what you're looking at there is 8 shots, and you're fishing for the 6s for the devastating wounds. But devastating wounds have been heavily nerfed as per the September balance data slate. Really, they only cut through armor saves and vulnerable saves now. They don't become mortal wounds and start allowing you to shred multiple 1 wound infantry at once. So the Culverins and the Cavaliers, I just don't think they've got the volume of fire to reliably farm devastating wounds out of them. But hey, they could spike and they could be pretty decent. But for me, I think the big problem is that it just comes across as quite underwhelming. There are better sources of autocannons in the Guard Codex. There are better sources of las cannons. You're never going to take the multi-lasers. The heavy bolter heavy flamers don't. Again, we have plenty of those knocking around the Guard without having to take tanks that are dedicated towards them. The Volkite stuff is the most interesting, but for me, there's not the volume and there's not really the reliability for it to be something that you can really factor into your game plan. It'll crop up now and again and it'll be a kind of like, ooh, that was nice, but really, that's as far as it goes. But wait, I hear you cry. Maybe the thing's got a good ability. Maybe its weapons aren't very good, but it can act as some kind of force multiplier and that will bring it back and make it viable, right? No, wrong. Unfortunately, Ancient Conquest is... It's not ideal, to use a British phrase. Ancient Conquest, each time this model makes an attack that targets an enemy unit that is within your opponent's deployment zone, reroll a hit roll of 1 and reroll a wound roll of 1. Now that would be a brilliant ability if it just had it all the time. That would be a brilliant ability if it just mirrored what the Lehman Russ battle tank had. Okay, yeah, you've got inbuilt rerolls of 1 if the enemy's on an objective. Whoa, amazing. Full rerolls, baby, but it doesn't have that. Instead, it relies on your opponent sitting in their deployment zone, which they're not going to do. And even if they do sit in the deployment zone, one of 2 situations is going to be active. Either they're going to be on a competitive board, sat behind a line of sight blocking piece of terrain on the home objective, not engaging with you, and therefore you can't see them, so you can't kill them. Or they're going to be in their deployment zone, but not near an important part of the map. Because typically there's like one objective in each person's deployment zone, and then the other primaries, the things that you're fighting over, the really, big deals, points mean prizes, they're not in the deployment zone. So either you can't shoot the unit that you want to shoot, and if you shoot something to take advantage of Ancient Conquest, you're diverting your energy away from areas of the battlefield where you actually should be concentrating. So it's basically just a nothing ability. It might pop up here and there, but it's not enough by any stretch of the imagination to save this vehicle. But even with all of the bad things that I've said about the Carnodon, there could still be hope. There could still be one thing that makes it possible to use. If it's just cheap and cheerful. If this thing is like super spammable, you can chuck 3 of them into your list without even considering it. If they can really bulk out your armored forces, if they can do the job of the Hellhound better than the Hellhound, which is like to bulk out your armored forces, but to actually have weapons or some kind of long-range Dakka that is going to be helpful. Because the problem with the Hellhound is that it's a decent platform and it's got a good ability, but its weapons are very lackluster. Like you've got one half-decent flamer on the turret. The melter cannon's all right, but it doesn't compete with the other main damage dealers you can have in your army. So the Hellhound's like, it's got the good profile, but it's not got the weapons. The Carnodon, even with all of this, could be totally viable if it was cheap and spammable, because it can just bulk out your armored fleet and still provide some, if not notable, at least semi-viable long-range fire support. Nope, it's 160 points. Oh, God! Oh, God, it's so expensive. I think I've mentioned this before. I mentioned it in my Malkador video, saying how the Forge World team isn't exactly Johnny on the spot when it comes to keeping points updated properly. the Carnodon wasn't really viable, but at least there was a small argument to be made in its favor of it being a cheap main battle tank when Russes were at a minimum like 180, realistically like 200 points. Now that Russes have come down and the top end is 180 and most Russes are coming in at like between 160 and sort of 180 points, the Carnodon really just doesn't have a leg to stand on. Because honestly, there is no reason to ever take one. If you're like, I want to spend 160 points on a tank, you are better every single time going for a goddamn Lehman Russ Eradicator. Now, I'm not saying the Eradicator is a good unit, boys. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. But the Eradicator has got the extra wound, and it's actually got decent long-range firepower. It has a decent turret, and what's also cool about it is it's kind of like a store brand demolisher, because it can get stuck in combat and it doesn't mind it. It can start blasting away. I like to describe the Eradicator as the demolisher, but that we've got at home, right? So under no circumstances would you ever pick a Carnodon over an Eradicator. Hell, you take a goddamn Vanquisher over a Carnodon. The Vanquisher would be 5 points cheaper. Realistically, this Carnodon needs to come down a lot of points. And when I say a lot, I mean it needs to be like 100. That might seem ridiculously cheap, but let's just put this into context for a moment. Compare a Carnodon to a Hydra. Hydra isn't as durable, but a Hydra has way more firepower than a Carnodon because it has 4 autocannon shots which are twin linked and also get anti-fly as well. And it's got the heavy bolter on it as well. So it's like, okay, the Carnodon is like tougher but less firepower than the Hydra. So why is the Carnodon 65 points more than a Hydra? A push, maybe you bring the Carnodon down to like 110 points. But anything more than 120 points, and this thing is just never ever going to get taken. It has no viability whatsoever. Which makes me sad, because the Carnodon is actually a pretty cool tank. It looks a bit weird. It is a Forge World special after all, but it's kind of like, it's so ugly, I love it, you know? Oh, and I've actually seen one in real life, and it's like seeing a unicorn, boys. I have seen one in real life, and they don't photograph very well, but on the tabletop with a beautiful color scheme, the tanks actually do really shine, and they are quite a nice spectacle to see on the tabletop. But unfortunately, that's never ever going to happen, because no one's going to ever take a Carnodon until GW comes in and gives it a better ability and brings its points down. Now, I know I've been pretty salty over this tank today, and I've kind of been really harsh to the old Carnodon, which is, you shouldn't be mean to your elders, boys. But if I were to sum this whole thing up, I honestly, truly believe that the Carnodon is the worst tank in the Imperial Guard. And yes, that does include the Valdor Tank Hunter. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Do you own a Carnodon? Have you managed to make it work in 10th edition, or is it currently sitting on the shelf? If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to smash that like button, and of course, subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordy and Glory full-time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the Call of Duty. So a massive thank you to Bon Bon Bird, Mad Larkin, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, August Vardy, and the Tommies. Thank you guys. Your incredible support makes a huge difference, and it is a big part of how I'm able to do Mordy and Glory full time. But that's all for now. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.